Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video I want to, for no particular reason, discuss the firing range, and mostly the ways that it does and does not work, and why we as a community have basically moved away from using any parts of it anymore, and have moved over to calculating stuff out. Mostly because we'll be discussing today two major parts. First off, we'll be discussing the DPS meter parts, which are the far right two stations. And secondly, we'll discuss the time to kill station, as both have varying ways in which they can and cannot be used and have been misused through time by many people. And yeah, let's go discuss them for no particular reason. And to first discuss the DPS side of things, or the DPS meter side of things, I have put together here who I like to call Agent Grey, who is very based. And he's not based because I love internet lingo and want to say what the kids say because the 35-year-olds say it, so the kids repeat them. He's very based because with this gray gear on, he of course basically has no stats. And not basically has no stats, he actually has no stats on nothing. And that means that he's at base values basically. He has a weapon damage that is basically at base. He has no crit chance, so he can't even crit damage. He has a headshot of the base of the weapon. This is one of the ways to see actually what the differences is in weapon classes, especially what the headshot differences are. He has no damage to armor, he has no damage to health, he has no damage to targets out of cover. And even here under all weapon damage and specific weapon damage, there is nothing. As especially as well, I've taken a specialization that I've basically just reset. So there's nothing coming from there. There's nothing on the weapon itself stat-wise. And that means that this character on this setup will actually just hit that weapon damage over and over and over again because there is nothing multiplying up against it. And I can show that here. We have just, it's 147s all the way down. And just to as well show an oddity, which I've found, and I don't really know why the game presents it this way, especially. If we turn on the show base damages, which I have done here already, we can see that actually for the AKM, it is showing as the calculation for that weapon damage. It is showing a 148 base for the weapon, an addition of plus, -1. And this is kind of weird because it is hitting for that 147, but it's showing a base of 148. And here, of course, we're not at level 40 where these numbers get truncated to the nearest 1,000. And it's kind of hard to tell what they are, so you have to kind of calculate it out. It's showing the numbers precisely, and we're hitting 147. But yeah, it's plus -1. It is the same for this ACR, but it isn't the same for this military P416. What I've kind of found is that around 130, if the total or if the base damage of a weapon is above 130, it does that. And I'm curious if that is actually true as well in higher, like in our level 40 gear. But of course, we can't really tell because there the numbers are truncated, so we can't get a precise number. But yeah, so having this gear, we're just going to hit 147 over and over again. So we're going to hit that last hit of 147. And I'll specifically grab the AKM here because it has an RPM of 600. If we divide that by 60 to go from RPM, rounds per minute, to rounds per second, that is a super easy calculation, and that's why I picked the AKM. It's 600 divided by 60 is 10. We're firing 10 rounds a second, so we can very easily calculate out our DPS without even spreadsheets, without even anything assisting us, of 147 times 10. We just add a 0 at the end. It's 1K47, 1K470 to spell it all the way out. And let's see if we actually, what happens when we try to get that out of the DPS meter. So yeah, let's see what the DPS meter does. I'm going to reset it, of course. We have I'm going to actually make this an invulnerable elite enemy even. just so it has more shots before it dies, so it's not even that it is dying or like misregistering a final shot or something. And what we should hit is, yeah, damage to last hit will be 147. That part of the firing range works, and that's also what we use it for, even at level 40 and stuff, is to just come in here and get the damage numbers out of these targets, because in most cases there are ways to break it. There are specific ways to break it, and there are specific ways that it breaks that we can't use that. But if you come in here with the level 40 gear and just shoot this, especially with just ARs and such, no very weird thing, you can get at least your damage hit numbers, and you can use those, for instance, on spreadsheets to calculate out your DPS. But here, our DPS meter part of it, it should basically, on the first shot, it should not really be able to still calculate anything. At the second shot, it actually should have all of the information needed for it to spit out 1,470 DPS and just be flat at that. Now, of course, this is just all getting calculated out client side, is my guess, and you wouldn't want to do this server side. It's not worthwhile enough. It's not important enough to be that precise. So stuff like maybe frame rate and such may have variance in there. I've gone out of my way to actually lower my graphic settings a little bit and also VSync it up and frame rate limited up to 60. So we're just at a flat 60. Just to maybe take out that kind of variance. Although I've tested it with open frame rates, closed frame rates, even setting it to like 20 frames a second, limiting it to that, and trying it out. And in all ways, it breaks. I'm not going to show all of them here because you can verify my findings as they are. And yeah, and if you can show in some way that parts of it do work, I would be very much interested. I'm not in here to just say this is wrong. I'm just to show here why we don't really use it. Why most of the community has moved over to calculating DPS out. So yeah, let's unload a mag here, and we're going to just go for body shots. We don't want a headshot. We do have a little bit of a headshot multiplier, and that's just because that's innate to weapon types. And yeah, we should get a flat number out of here, and it should not exceed, basically, it should basically be 1,470, and should just be that, and shouldn't exceed it, because then it's over-reporting. And if it's showing a lot less, it's under-reporting. So it needs to report around the right number. Now, I'm going to just start unloading now. And what we could see there was that there was a 1.6k in there. If you basically look over at the DPS meter and keep an eye out on it, as I'm going to reset it once more, and basically look at what the highest value that we see there on the DPS meter is. As yeah, we had a 1.6 there at some points again, and while it is kind of normalizing towards that 1.47k, it is still actually over it at the end of the max. Still, it was basically around 1.49. Towards the end of it, and there again it's around 1.5 hovering over there, and it's just going up and down and stuff like that. And that is basically why we don't use it, because here we've calculated out our DPS and we kind of know a value that we're going to hit. If you don't know that number to begin with, which number do you pick from there? Because for most places, they'll pick the highest number, because of course they do. You're going to pick the highest number that you can see in there. You'll go frame by frame, grab that number, screen grab it, and clickbait with it. And that is just human nature. There is not... and that's why, yeah, we cannot use that DPS meter at all, really, because that same around 10%, if you're going from like 1.47k to like 1.6k, let's say that's around 10% difference. That same 10% is actually holding true as well when we go up in values. And it breaks even more when you start adding in crit chance, when you start adding in other multipliers, when you start adding in weird talents where you can get extreme RPMs, as RPM seems to be one of the ways that it breaks in. Because here we're giving it the best chance to succeed, and it is still over-reporting by quite a bit. And it's hovering and coming back down to the number that we are expecting But that's only because we know what number we're expecting. Because yeah, you can't even take that number at the very end of the clip, because there, for instance, it was around 1.49. That's still over-reporting by quite a bit, and you only know that that number is a little bit more if you actually calculate it out again. And if you're calculating it out, then you don't need this test. That's why we don't ever use this. It's irregular, and even in its best incarnation, it breaks. So now let's go and actually really break this. So here I've gone and grabbed the Famas. It is still the same build underneath it. We just have the stats of the Famas coming in now, which is a burnout specifically, but it doesn't really matter. All I wanted was a non-damage talent, non-ramping talent especially, so that that is not going into any of the calculations for the damage, because we are still basically going to hit a flat number over and over again. Here in this case, of course, we've gained 15 assault rifle damage, as this is basically an optimized fully burnout here. We're reporting here as a weapon damage of 50 something K, because it gets truncated at level 40. Thousands get truncated here, which is quite annoying because yeah, there's plenty of space here to show the full number. What we could of course do is go into weapon stats, and we'll get our 50K 819 as our stated weapon damage, which will be basically when no other multiplier is active. So in this case, although we have also 21 damage to health, and we have 10 damage to targets out of cover. Here I'm going to shoot at an invulnerable enemy, and they will both be having DTH will be active, and the range targets are out of cover because they're not smart enough to take cover. So that will be active as well. But basically all of those will be separate multipliers on top of this. So it's 50 points, or well, whatever this number was, 50,819 times 1.21 as the DTH multiplier, and then times 1.1 for the damage targets out of cover multiplier. And what we don't even have to do is calculate it out, because it's that number. It's 67640. Because yeah, we're hitting still, we don't have any crit chance still, so we're hitting that number over and over and over and over again. That's all we're hitting. If we take that into our good friend Google, although actually first I want to say the Famas, of course, is a 900 RPMs a second. If we divide that by 60, we get 15. That is its rounds per second. That is how many rounds are going out. So it's basically that 67640 number times 15 for our DPS. That is still a pretty easy, at least in concept, damage calculations. Although, of course, I'm not going to do that off the top of my head. But here's what Google says it will be. And that is 1,014,600. And this should be basically what the DPS meter reports. Now, if we actually play around with shooting this enemy and an invulnerable enemy, we can slightly see, as it is pretty consistent, that we're kind of hovering around that number. So you might think, that is, you know, we could use that. But the variance comes in very much from talents and RPM and stuff like that, breaking it. So here, when we're giving it its best chance, it likely will still at points over-report, because I saw a 1.09 there, where we should be 1.01 is in the millions, our number that we're actually, you know, should be around. But it is still over-reporting by around that same 10%, kind of, at points. It isn't going overboard, actually, as quite often here. I would actually expect, if I go again, at a point to see a 1.1. We didn't, but that is still actually not the point that I'm going to make here, because if we move this over to be just a normal enemy here, likely here, what will happen is because I can predict this, because we haven't done enough testing on it to know, on the first one, we will underreport by quite a bit. That number will also likely be quite consistent in several attempts on the first one before you basically reset. And then quite often the second number will over-report by a lot, because we're killing an enemy and then we're basically cutting out our reload, which a lot of people think that does give a correct DPS value. But for no particular reason, let's test that out. So look at that number, 796. In a second, 796K, truncating the rest off. That number will show up again and again whenever we reset. But now let me put out a second mag. And we have 1.15. So we're over-reporting by quite a bit, by basically 15%. That's also why I grabbed this Famas, because it landed up quite nicely around the million, making it easy to compare. Now we'll put in another mag, and we saw 1.2 at points, and then it dropped back down to 1.15. But you would think maybe that this is your DPS value. And you wouldn't know better unless you calculate it out. Let's reset it again, and likely again we'll hit that 796. We do, basically the exact same number, even with the under 1,000 digits. And then if we put in a second mag, this time we landed a lot closer to our actual number, 1.084. It's still over-reporting, but not by as much as the last. Let's do it once more, because mostly especially, so here we still have a number, but this number is of course completely useless, because we know that this isn't correct. It's under-reporting here, which is just as faulty as over-reporting. And we'll shoot it once more. We'll land it around that 1.15 again. But what will likely happen at a point is, if I try again, and we got it there it over-reported by basically 30%, as we're at 1.3 million all of a sudden. There's variance there where this weapon has none. And this should be a completely easy calculation for this thing to do. And it keeps spitting out different numbers each and every time. And that is why we do not use that DPS meter. It is basically, if you don't have a calculation to put this up against, which one do you pick? Because most people will, of course, pick this the highest number here. Put it as the title of look at this perfect gray build with 1.3 million DPS, and it is basically wrong. That's why we don't use the range except for getting damage number or hit numbers out of it. As let's go and really break it now. And to really break this thing, I was asking around a little bit from people of if they found any points where the range breaks in exceptional ways. And especially one person who I've quite often interacted with, and we've used each other to peer review each other quite often, Rossi, who is also well known for his contributions to the community, and especially his written build guides in the Discord spreadsheet. He put me on the track of this specific build and it breaking spectacularly. And we'll try to get a DPS number out of here. This is, of course, a full build. It is Umbra, as you may see there. I have a Famas in my hand, so we're going for really high RPMs. And let's really see how this one breaks. As I'll pull back out of cover and start firing, getting as high of an Umbra buff basically going. Because we're up to 8.4 there, I'll charge back up, basically keeping Umbra as highest. We're trying to break it. I'm not playing fair with the range, of course, here. I'll pull back out, and there at the fourth kill, and we'll basically hold it there. We have 11.3 million DPS, and that's, of course, if I were to fire another mag into it, it would actually come down a little bit, but it will likely hover around 11 million. As I've done this a few times, as I'm cherry-picking this result, of course. As I've done it like four times. One of them actually landed on 11.5. One of them didn't go above 10. And one was like 10,800,000. With a variance, of course, a lot because of crit chance and stuff. But here, of course, if I wanted to have a number for, let's say, for a particular reason, to put underneath a video, of course, or something, I would pick that number, of course, right? A high number. Or actually, I would pick the 1.5 or 11.5. But I misspoke in that take, so that take got deleted. But we're using this take now. And that, of course, also means that my Umbra set must be, of course, perfectly set up. This must be like the one that I have on my build collection. The Coyote and the Backpack are from different builds on this character, so they are actually maxed out. And of course, I did grab a Cheska one. You'll be already missing a mod here, you might notice. These 4 pieces have just been crafted. These three are with weapon handling even. This one came out with crit damage, but was with weapon damage. We're missing that mod. I can even go into chat, and this is like 3 minutes ago where we've crafted these 4 pieces. I haven't even crafted multiples. You can literally see that I've crafted one of each and just put them on. Didn't even look at what stats they were really until we got down here. And do you really think that this build is doing 11.3? Because let me give you context about 11.3 million DPS on chest, because we're also not going for headshots. We could get this number a lot higher, of course, by going for headshots as well, because we'll get that multiplier in there. But I specifically went for body and body plus crit, basically, as our 2 numbers. Because if you go into my Obliterate showcase, my Obliterate Strikers showcase, we did some calculations there for the DPS numbers for an Obliterate Striker and also in there a chest striker. So using the striker chest, an Obliterate Striker is around 9.3 million-ish DPS. A chest striker is around 11 million-ish DPS. Do you really think that this Umbra set is doing, especially at how bad it is set up, is doing 11 million? Or is the range over-reporting? Because I can tell you already, this build, I did a rough calculation, not even put it into a calculator with its stats. It's not worth it, really. Around 6 million-ish at most. Because as well, of course, we're using that buff. We're keeping it at maxed out buff the whole time. That is really what's pulling up that number, really. And of course, because, yeah, we do have a Coyote in there. We do have a maxed out weapon. We do have a Cheska backpack. With vigilance, like that's bringing up the numbers a little bit, but the rest of the gear set, of course, here is just bad pieces. Like this would be a non-build. If I had me as a teammate like this on a mission, I would be a little bit miffed at them. But it is reporting 11.3 million, so Umbra must be the best set, right? Like we should all swap over to Umbra. That's the conclusions that you would come to with these kinds of numbers. And especially, of course, this is breaking because of RPM more than anything, basically. So yeah, when anybody basically uses these kinds of metrics or tries to put them in videos and Reddit posts and Discords, then tell them that for no particular reason, they should maybe watch this video and move over from using the range for its DPS calculations to just using it for its hit numbers, because those you can use. So the numbers you see on the right side, like those, they also break in some cases, but they are so rare that I'm not even going to show them here because, yeah, it's not worth the time. It would make this video even longer. But the DPS number is unusable. Let's move on to the time to kill section of the firing range. And let's discuss the time to kill part of the range as well for no particular reason. As to explain how this one works, we have a settable difficulty on the left there that will have, each of them will have several set patterns that it can pop up. They pop up at random, so it's actually quite annoying to try to get the same pattern over and over and over again. And it spits out a time to kill, which is basically from the first shot hitting the first enemy to the last shot killing the last enemy. What the time in there was in seconds. So, for instance, here, I am going to do this testing with this pattern, with these 4 elites and those 2 purples in this exact same pattern over and over again. And that's also why I'm going to have cuts in here, because getting the same pattern to pop up over and over again is actually annoying, so just cutting that out. And the build that I'm using is just a high-end glass, especially because I don't want to have Obliterate in there, adding in its variance. We're using glass. That does not have variance. We're using vigilance for the same reason. I don't have a damage talent that will alter the amount of variance of the damage per hit. And we're going to put up a Famas graded to level, or graded to expertise grade 23 on it. And we're pitting it against this tactical Mark 16 that I just had lying around in the stash, which was open talentable, and I've put fast hands on it. And we're just going to pit these two against each other in testing here. I'm going to do that with this pattern, and I'm basically going to use, I'm going to capture footage of each one several times, and I'll just show you the fastest, because basically it is like doing qualifying in racing. Your fastest time was your best time. That will likely as well be the one that I missed the least shots in here, because of course it's also reliant on me, how I affect the testing. And that especially makes it so that if you're looking at footage from others, you have to be very, very careful that for particular reasons, they aren't incidentally or actively cherry picking. As keep an eye on what this test result will be, as yeah, of course, I'm trying to trick you in some way. And I'm guessing you will catch it before we reach the point where I reveal it. But now that I've primed you to look for it, let's see if you find it. As yeah, here we have the pattern set up, those two purples, and 4 elites in this pattern. Let's see what the Famas does. .8. I'll try to actually keep the footage rolling, try to get the same pattern again. We did. I'm gonna do another one with the Famas. I missed a few shots in between. Another 4.8. Let's see if we get the same pattern again. .7. Let's see if we get the same pattern again. We do. Let's take one more, and actually I'm likely then not cutting this out. 4.6, and that's likely the best that the Famas will of course do. Let's now grab the tactical Mark 16, and I'll try to get the same pattern with that. So yeah, here we have the tactical Mark 16, and I'm gonna try to do the same test. We have the same pattern once more. I'll start from the left to the right. Missed a bunch of shots there, but I'm not concerned, because we have a 3.8, where the Famas at its peak, the best that I got out of it was a 4.6, with of course a few misses here and there maybe, but yeah, that was its qualifying time basically. Let's do this once more with this Mark 16. Still missed a bunch of stuff, 4.2. In a second I'll try hard with it. We got a 3.9. I'll try hard as I did with the Famas as well. Try to get the same pattern once more. So here I'm really going for it. 3.5. From that we can conclude that grading a Famas is the worst gun. Grading it to 23 didn't do anything. We killed even slower. For particular reasons here, of course, as shown here. But yeah, this, of course, for no particular reason have I chosen this exact 2 weapons, this exact challenge level. And of course, even for those that have used this part of the range, they might be concerned as to why on very hard there are purple enemies there. And that's of course because I've cherry-picked already. The cherry-picking didn't happen there in me showing my build or showing like one is graded and stuff. The range is set to normal. I have cherry-picked long before we even started shooting here or me started recording footage. And I've picked something, a pattern, that I know that the Famas cannot one-mag, or will likely never really one-mag, at least not with my capabilities. Someone else might be able to one-mag it here. But that is basically the cherry-picking here, because we're not comparing on damage here. Much more important metric, because we're one-magging, especially with the tactical Mark 16, is the damage per mag. Even if we were reloading, reload becomes then a very important thing and not the damage. Now, of course, as well, the thing is that at the end of that test, if I try to get the same pattern again, as we have it here, the Famas ends this test with, even though I'm shooting horribly, It has 45 rounds still. So if there were more enemies than that, more enemies than my specific setup here, whether I've cherry picked, but of course in the real settings or just outside in the game, in missions, in countdown, in summit, in raids and stuff, you can't know what is in front of you. So the Famas here ends that test with 45 rounds remaining. If we go back to the tactical Mark 16, basically, well, I shot very horribly there, but the very next thing that it would basically need to do after shooting all of those enemies would be to reload, which if I kind of like do a little bit better here, it has 4 rounds left. So it would need to reload at some point now to continue killing another enemy. If there was one more enemy here, we would need to reload. And that is why this kind of testing cannot be used to determine damage of a weapon. Because, of course, even if the Famas wasn't graded, these two do not compare to each other on damage. And we know that. And that's also what we pick. We pick more damage because it is sometimes important to do more damage. It makes going from struggling on a raid to easily succeeding if you actually do have a good setup and you're maximizing towards damage. The game has been made easier and easier by efforts of people of trying to min-max stuff out and spreading that information around. Because yeah, if you're using this and let's say for no particular reason, I'm going to say you have an M4 with flatline and you put that up against a St. Elmo, and you end your testing with a set that you've picked, specifically actually for no specific reason, I'm going to say that it was, I believe, on medium here and on heroic settings on the range. And if for no particular reason you had used that set and you ended the set with the M4 having to reload 3 times and the Elmo twice, because of course damage per mag and reload are very important for this kind of testing. If the M4 at the end of that test is ending at 18 rounds and 15 rounds, for no reason in particular, I'm picking those numbers, and the Elmo ends up at 4 rounds remaining and 2 rounds remaining, or well, 1 round remaining. If there was one more enemy and you had done this, that would have changed the validation of that test. Because of course, if I go over here and then actually set my range to heroic, as normally it would be set to, and I pick very hard here, which will spawn 6 elites, at least consistently on heroic and very hard, it always spits out 6 elites. What happens there is that if I grab the Famas and try hard a little bit, we get a 13. If I grab Mark 16 and try hard the same amount, we get a 13.4 with some misses. So let's maybe try hard again on the Famas. I don't really need to try hard on the Famas. It just needs to do it in 3 mags, where the Mark 16 needs to also be in 3 mags. Once they are both in that spectrum where they are each 3 magging, then of course the Famas wins out. Of course it does. And for very particular reasons. Now, of course, if you pit a Famas against an Elmo, you can cherry pick specifically where you want your enemies to be at that range of, is it a 3 reload for the Famas and a 2 reload for the Elmo? Then of course the Elmo is going to win. If it's a setup where they're both reloading 3 times, the Famas is going to win. This kind of testing, for any particular reasons of trying to get a damage out of something, is completely nonsensical, because you can't know what these enemies are going to be out in the open world or out in the game itself. You can try to maximize towards a time to kill if you actually exactly know what enemies are going to be, but you never really do. So we maximize towards having the part that we have control over, which is our own damage. And then, of course, something like a Famas makes sense. Grading it up makes sense. Going for damage makes sense. Because, of course, we could maybe give up a blue core and grab a blue core or two here and land around the same time, because we're not having to hit an extra reload. But there's also a point where there's one more enemy, and then you are actually hitting a reload extra. Because it's those reloads especially that take up the time to kill. This is not a test of damage. This is mostly a test of reload speed and damage per mag, together, of course, with burst and sustained DPS. But this is mostly affected by damage per mag, especially if you are going to do testing where it's 1 or 2 or 3 mags. Because what I could, of course, do to gain a little bit more accurate output between the two is to, for instance, go a build where I am mostly yellow or blue. Let's grab a third drone build, as I need to leave the range, of course, to do that. As I don't actually have a tanking build on this account, as that is actually what I wanted to grab. But here, of course, none of our stuff is applying into our weapons much. And if we grab that those two same weapons, and here, of course, we also don't have the crit chance really to really get much out of fast hands. Then it starts becoming very clear at even one enemy, as if we look at one enemy kill. We kill them in 7.8 there. I'll pop it back up here. We're already in the 9s where we kill them. That is the difference in their damage output, because especially, of course, also this one's graded to 23. Like, that is quite an increase. That is more, that's even on a high-end red or on a 6 red core build, that is still around 10%-ish, just under 10%-ish. So yeah, those kind of metrics matter, but this isn't the test to show you the difference between two weapons. That is why we use burst and sustained DPS, because we remove the bias that could be introduced for no particular reason, or more likely for very particular reasons were introduced into the test. And that's why, yeah, time to kill as a metric is interesting. It is a tool that you can use. You can compare two builds here, try to get the kills out of it. Even use it to like improve your aim over time, because yeah, my aim, for instance, here was of course horrible, as I'm also talking while shooting. But it isn't a metric to compare weapons with, because once you understand the difference that damage per mag and such make, do you really want to forego damage to output more damage per mag, have better reload speeds over killing faster? Because that is what this kind of testing will push you towards. If this becomes your gospel, then you will push towards sustained DPS much more so than burst, because burst matters less here than especially damage per mag, especially reload speed, and sustained DPS is about the same amount, basically, influencing the results here. But this isn't equivalent to out in the real game, because you have no control about what spawns over there. Here you do. Here you have really pretty granular control with the difficulty setting, with this challenge setting of what you want to have to spawn here, and you can cherry pick your heart out. In the real game, there is quite a big difference in if you're fighting just running a league run, or if you're on a heroic countdown, or if you're shooting at a raid boss. And then metrics like burst DPS work a lot better than this, because this can be really easily used to introduce bias, intentionally or unintentionally. And that's really why, for no particular reason, I really wanted to talk about this part. As we'll continue on with this series, likely in the next episode of it, which will be several videos away, of discussing why I feel it is quite important to die more often, because a lot of people really value survivability, surviving over everything, and I feel that is the wrong choice. And for no particular reason, I will discuss that in the next part of this no particular reason series. The next video on the channel itself will be the second part of the high-end glass red, as the thought process of it. As that has been quite a while ago, so let me finish up that one. And that will be then followed up with a Hunter's Fury SMG build showcase. I hope you join me either for those or over on Twitch, and have a good night.